Any given September, the stone industry meets in Verona, Italy for Marmomac, the world's largest trade event for the marble and stone supply chain. From quarries to processed products, technologies and machinery to tools and more, Marmomac 2024 is set to be another great success, with 1,507 exhibitors, 12 halls and 7 outdoor areas, 76,000 square meters of floor space, and 51,000 visitors, with 66% of those being international visitors from 54 countries. Visit www.marmomac.com to learn more about Marmomac. See you in Verona, Italy from September 24th to 27th, 2024. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Beau Jarvis, President and CEO of Wesgroup Properties.
And you're talking with us today because you recently, as in a couple of days ago, I think, put out a video explaining the housing crisis and sort of the stumbling blocks that are in the way of, well, the housing industry to help ameliorate it. So maybe you could explain why put out a video in the first place as opposed to, say, some sort of white paper or statement or something.
Yeah, sure. We actually put it out a few weeks ago. We put it out anonymously. A couple of days ago, we sort of shared that it was us who created it. The reason that we did that, we created the video is really because we want to start to have more conversation and dialogue about what's actually happening in the housing ecosystem in Canada. I think there's a huge lack of understanding, and there's this sort of convenient age-old narrative that we're in a housing crisis as a result of developer greed, landlord greed, or whatever the case is. And when that couldn't be further from the truth at this point. We've seen complexities in building new housing and construction typologies increase over the last several decades, to the extent that the risk involved in building these major projects is no longer, the returns are no longer commensurate with that risk. And the returns have been diminishing for years now, to the point where, you're seeing in the midst of this massive housing crisis, housing starts diminish, homegrown Canadian builders building more housing in the United States than they do in Canada. And we really need to stop and ask ourselves why that's happening. And so we really wanted to find an illustrative way to kind of share some of the facts about what the process is and what it takes to build housing. And that's why we titled it Homes Don't Just Happen, because I think people think, oh yeah, housing will just get built. Let's form and create policy around who gets to use it and how it gets used. But I think that assumption that housing will just get built is not a safe assumption at the moment.
One of the things the video addresses is the rules around it. It's not that the rules are there, it's that the rules, according to the video anyway, keep changing. And so maybe you could go into that.
Yeah. It's incredible. As we were making the video, and as I speak publicly about this or engage in government advocacy and speak to politicians and policymakers regularly, and sometimes I find myself explaining the situation, and as I'm explaining it, I'm actually thinking to myself, this is fundamentally insane. And so if you think about any business that makes a decision to make an investment, make a capital commitment, take some risk, if they're good business people or groups, they do their due diligence and they understand the policy framework and including taxation and all these different things before they make that investment decision. And that's what we do. And that's what most good, business people do, developers, builders, et cetera. In our industry, though, we will make a decision and there will be new policy that is applied. And again, housing takes a long time to come to fruition. In some cases, we'll call it 5 to 10 years as an average in terms of getting, turning the key on the first door of a project when we buy the land. And so in that time, we see building code changes, we see all kinds of policy changes, as well as taxes, fees, and levies, big changes there. Along the journey of processing that housing application. And so, but we made the decision to make that investment and take that risk sort of way back here. And we're following the rules, and we're what would be referred to as an in-stream project. And there's zero protection for these in-stream projects from all this new policy. And it creates so much uncertainty and so much risk, it's become untenable. And you think about it, we use the analogy of a car manufacturer. Imagine, Ford's manufacturing vehicles, and they make their decision to build out a new vehicle. They build a plant, they buy all their inputs and materials, and they're moving along. And retroactively, there's new policy or a new tariff put in place on all the inventory and the decisions that they already made. That just it wouldn't fly. But somehow that seems to sort of be okay with housing. And we're trying to point out that it's not okay. And you're seeing a lot of, there's a big sort of, I would say there's some momentum here. You're seeing a lot of other coalitions, developer coalitions, builder groups starting to talk about this a lot.
Now, one of the things, I assume this happens on all levels, and especially with the federal government with having initiatives for affordable housing in the last couple budgets, but you specifically focus on municipal policies, presumably because that's where zoning and all the rest of it occurs. So maybe you could kind of drill down on that and how municipal, especially Vancouver, where we're both at. I know Vancouver's surrounding cities have a lot less building regulations than Vancouver itself, to the point where the same phenomenon you mentioned happens locally, where people will go to New West or, say, Surrey, because it's just easier to build there.
Yeah. Vancouver definitely is the poster child for regulatory framework, aka red tape. The Vancouver has more policies and procedures to get housing built than any city, certainly in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia. They also have their own charter, right? And so they have their own. They can create their own. They have their own building code. So it doesn't match the provincial building code in many respects. And so getting housing through the city of Vancouver can be extremely challenging and time consuming. And we have projects that are in year 10 of planning that we haven't even started. They went through prolonged negotiation processes for community amenity contributions. They've been subject to new policy change that has made us have to go back to the city and redesign the project. And it's chaos. Metro Vancouver just increased their development cost charges by close to 2,000%. Those fee increases come into effect in 2025. And the board of Metro Vancouver is made up of elected officials, including many councillors from the city of Vancouver. We warned the board that should this move forward, we're going to have to come back and renegotiate many of our deals with you in terms of community amenity contributions. So we went back to we're in year 9 or 10 with one project in the city of Vancouver. It took 2 years to negotiate the community amenity contribution. And as a result of that DCC increase with Metro Vancouver that was voted for by elected officials in the city of Vancouver, we're now going back and renegotiating the community amenity contribution. And so we can't even get these projects started. So that's the city of Vancouver. And I could go on for, hours there. But I think that we really need to start taking, and many cities, including the city of Vancouver, run processes trying to delete and expedite certain aspects of their permitting processes. I think they've made some gains in certain areas, but with large complex projects, we're still, we have a ton of work to do.
And just the whole thing seems to be like the cliche of turning a super tanker around. Affordable housing is such a big thing that has built up over so many years. What are some of the possible solutions, especially from your perspective as a developer? What can you do to help this thing along?
I think, we housing has become so politicized. Obviously, there's an affordability issue here, no question. But it's become so politicized, it's become increasingly divisive. And I think we got to stop that. We've got to find common ground. We have to work together. The paradigm in this country is that 95% of housing, including non-market housing, is delivered by the private sector, including private sector capital, which includes these terrible things called investors, or these people called investors or groups, right? We have to recognize that's our paradigm in Canada, and we can debate whether that's appropriate, right? There's many other countries that, there's the government is more involved in housing, and maybe there's it's government's producing 25% of housing and private sector is producing 75%. I don't know what the appropriate ratio is, but right now in Canada, it's 95%. And if we just accept that and understand, and we can debate along the way how we might change that, that's, again, to your reference, turning the super tanker. If we accept that that's our paradigm, and then we say, okay, how are we going to incentivize the private sector to deploy capital, take risk, be compensated for that risk, and get housing built? That's where we need to go. We need to stop arguing. We need to stop politicizing it. We need to, stop making this so divisive, and just come together. It's a crisis, and we're not going to work our way out of this crisis without just moving forward.
And you mentioned advocacy and coalitions. Maybe you could point to people listening to, if they're interested, in what you guys are doing and then what other coalitions you're a part of are doing.
Yeah, I mean, we engage in a lot of advocacy, trying to advocate for our industry just as a company. And I testified at the House of Commons, a few weeks ago in Ottawa, regarding federal investment in housing. So we'll engage in those types of activities. We obviously created this illustrative video. And that's something that we're going to probably do a little bit more of that. And that's Housing Crisis 101, Why Homes Don't Just Happen. That's a YouTube video. We're members of the Urban Development Institute. We're members of RealPAC, which are industry-related associations that are advocating for more sustainable building policies, and policies around taxation and infrastructure that's needed as a result of growth, because it's important that we do come out and say that growth does need to pay for its fair share of the impacts of that growth, but we've gone well beyond what is determined as a fair share. So yeah, we those are the groups that we're involved with. We're involved in NAIOP, which is more of an industrial related association, but we try and participate in as much advocacy and ongoing work on policy as we possibly can. It's really important.
Okay, thanks for joining us today, Beau.
Yeah, no problem.